It was a quiet morning on my ranch, just the way I liked it. The sun was rising over the rolling fields, casting long golden shadows as I sipped my coffee on the porch. My land stretched far beyond the horizon, untouched by suburban sprawl, and more importantly, far beyond the jurisdiction of any homeowners association. I had deliberately purchased my property outside the reach of any HOA, ensuring I wouldn't have to deal with their nonsense rules about mailbox colors, fence heights, or how many chickens I could own. But that peace was shattered when a white SUV rolled up my gravel driveway, dust kicking up behind it. It wasn't anyone I recognized, just a middle-aged man and a woman, both wearing matching polo shirts emblazoned with an all-too-familiar acronym, HOA Patrol. I set my mug down and stood up, already feeling a wave of irritation wash over me. "Can I help you?" I called out, walking toward the vehicle. The man stepped out first, clipboard in hand, radiating the smugness of someone who thought they had unquestionable authority. "Sir, we're here on behalf of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association to discuss some violations on your property," he said. I narrowed my eyes. "Violations?" I repeated, my voice edged with disbelief. "Yeah," the woman chimed in, flipping through a thick stack of papers. "You've got unapproved structures, livestock not in designated zones," and she actually had the audacity to scoff, "a completely non-compliant driveway." I blinked. Then I laughed, short and sharp. "Non-compliant with what?" I asked. "This land isn't part of any HOA." The man's smug expression didn't falter. "Actually, Oak Ridge recently expanded its jurisdiction, and—" "Stop right there," I cut him off, folding my arms. "You do not have jurisdiction here. This ranch is private property. It was never part of Oak Ridge, and I sure as hell never signed any agreement to be governed by your HOA rules." The woman sighed dramatically, as if she'd dealt with difficult people like me before. "Sir, refusing to comply will result in escalating fines. We're just trying to help you avoid legal trouble down the line." My jaw clenched. I wasn't some suburban homeowner afraid of HOA threats. I was a ranch owner with rights, and these people were trespassing. "Let me make something crystal clear," I said, taking a step closer. "You and your HOA have no claim here. This is my land. You are not welcome on it. Now, unless you have a legal document proving otherwise, I suggest you get back in your little SUV and leave." The man frowned, looking ready to argue, but the woman nudged him. "Fine," she said, clearly exasperated. "But we'll be back." With that, they climbed into their car and drove off. I watched them go, my gut telling me this wasn't over. If they thought they could push me around, they were in for one hell of a surprise. A few days passed without incident, but I knew better than to believe the HOA busybodies had given up. Sure enough, it wasn't long before trouble reared its head again. This time, it wasn't just the same two HOA patrol members showing up uninvited. Oh no, they had reinforcements. Early one morning, I spotted 3 SUVs rolling up my driveway, kicking up an absurd amount of dust as they approached. I set down my wrench. I'd been working on fixing the fencing near my barn, and wiped my hands on my jeans. The sheer audacity of these people was astonishing. I was already moving toward them when the doors swung open, and out stepped the same smug duo from last time, now joined by 3 more people. 2 of them wore polo shirts like the original pair, while the third, a short, wiry man in an expensive suit, looked like he had just stepped out of a courtroom. A lawyer. I exhaled sharply, already annoyed. They were trying to intimidate me. "Big mistake, Mr. Daniels," the suited man called out as he adjusted his tie and stepped forward. "I'm Richard Hayes, legal counsel for the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association. We need to have a serious discussion about your property and your continued non-compliance with our community guidelines." I scoffed. "Non-compliance? You still don't get it, do you? I'm not part of your damn HOA." Richard gave a practiced, condescending smile. "We have reason to believe that your property falls under the newly annexed jurisdiction of Oak Ridge HOA. As such, you are required to adhere to the same rules as all other community members. Failure to do so could result in legal action." I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "Show me the paperwork." The lawyer blinked, caught slightly off guard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said. "If my land was somehow magically annexed into your HOA, You'd have legal documents proving it. Show them to me. One of the HOA patrol members, clipboard guy, shuffled through some papers and handed me a map. I took one look at it and let out a laugh. They had highlighted a large section of land that included my ranch, labeling it as newly acquired HOA territory. But I noticed something immediately. The boundaries were fraudulent. "This is cute," I said, holding up the map. "But this isn't a legal annexation. You can't just claim my land and expect me to play along." Richard's smile thinned. "I assure you, the process was legally conducted. If you refuse to comply, you'll be subjected to fines and further action." I stepped closer. "Listen here, Mr. Hayes. This ranch has been outside of Oak Ridge HOA since before your subdivision even existed. There are no legal agreements tying me to your ridiculous rules. And if you think you can strong-arm me into compliance, you've made a serious miscalculation." The HOA patrol woman rolled her eyes. "Sir, the easiest course of action would be to simply agree to the guidelines and—" "Not going to happen," I cut in. "You're trespassing on private property. Again, if you don't leave now, I'll be forced to involve the sheriff." The suited lawyer's confidence faltered. He clearly hadn't expected this much pushback. The other HOA members exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't dealing with some suburban homeowner who could be bullied into submission. I was a rancher, and I knew my rights. Still, Richard tried one last time. "Mr. Daniels, I urge you to reconsider." I didn't let him finish. "You have 60 seconds to get off my land before I call the sheriff for trespassing. And trust me, out here, we don't take kindly to people overstepping their boundaries." The tension was thick. The HOA members hesitated, probably debating whether they could bluff their way through this. But I saw the moment they realized they had no real leverage. The woman huffed. Richard straightened his tie, looking sour. And then, finally, they turned back to their SUVs. I watched them go, fists clenched. Something told me they weren't done yet. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. A week passed. I kept an eye out, half expecting another unwanted visit from the so-called HOA patrol. But things were oddly quiet. Too quiet. And that made me uneasy. I knew their type. People who didn't take no for an answer. People who thought their authority was absolute, even when they had no legal ground to stand on. I figured they were regrouping, coming up with another way to try and push me into submission. Sure enough, I wasn't wrong. One morning, I stepped out onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee and stopped in my tracks. A bright red sign had been hammered into the ground at the end of my driveway. Even from a distance, I could read the bold letters. Notice of noncompliance, pending fines, and legal action. I stormed over, ripped the sign out of the dirt, and read the fine print. According to the document stapled to the post, the Oak Ridge HOA was now formally fining me $500 per day for violating their community standards. Not only that, but if I failed to comply within 30 days, they were threatening a lien on my property. A lien. That was when I decided enough was enough. I was done playing nice. I marched inside, grabbed my phone, and called the county assessor's office. It took a bit of time, but after explaining the situation, I got what I needed. Legal documentation proving my land was not part of Oak Ridge HOA. I wasn't under their jurisdiction. I never had been. And legally, they had zero authority over me. Armed with that, I made my next call to the sheriff. It didn't take long for a deputy to arrive. Out here, law enforcement wasn't keen on private organizations trying to enforce nonsense rules where they had no legal power. The deputy, a broad-shouldered guy named Officer Tate, listened as I laid everything out. The trespassing, the harassment, the fraudulent jurisdiction expansion, and now the bogus fines and threats of a lien. He let out a slow sigh. "You're telling me they came on your property multiple times after you told them to leave?" "Yep. And they posted this sign without legal authority?" "Exactly." I handed him the documents from the county, showing my land was never under the HOA's control. They're trying to scam me into thinking I have to obey their rules. Tate looked over the papers, then gave me a nod. "All right, let's pay him a visit." I grinned. "Now you're talking." An hour later, I followed Tate to the Oak Ridge HOA office. It was one of those fancy glass buildings in the middle of the suburb, the kind that screamed fake authority. We walked inside. and the receptionist's eyes went wide when she saw a uniformed deputy beside me. "Can I help you?" she asked hesitantly. Tate flashed his badge. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge." She scurried away, and a few minutes later, Richard Hayes, the same smug lawyer from before, appeared. The moment he saw me, his expression soured. "Mr. Daniels, this is highly inappropriate." Tate cut him off. "You want to talk about inappropriate? Let's discuss how you've been harassing a man over land you have no legal claim to." Richard opened his mouth, but Tate wasn't done. "I've reviewed the county records. Mr. Daniels' property is not part of your HOA. You've been trespassing, making fraudulent claims, and posting illegal notices on private land." Richard's face turned red. "This is a misunderstanding." "No, it's not," Tate interrupted. "You knew exactly what you were doing. You tried to intimidate a landowner into compliance with rules that don't apply to him. That's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud." The room went dead silent. Richard adjusted his tie, sweat forming on his forehead. "We were simply enforcing our policies." Tate took a step closer. "Let me be clear. If you or any of your so-called HOA patrol step foot on Mr. Daniels' land again, you will be charged with trespassing. If you attempt to levy false fines or file a fraudulent lien, you will be facing legal repercussions. Do I make myself clear?" Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew he was beaten. "Understood," he muttered. Tate nodded. "Good. Now, I suggest you remove any record of fines, notices, or claims against Mr. Daniels' property." Immediately, Richard didn't argue. He knew better. By the next day, all signs of the HOA's harassment were gone. No more patrols. No more notices. No more threats. I even got a formal letter apologizing for the confusion. Though we all knew damn well it wasn't confusion at all. They had tried to pull a power move, and they had failed miserably. I kept my land, my peace, my freedom. And if the HOA ever tried anything again, well, let's just say, next time I wouldn't bother calling the sheriff first.